Well, shalom, everyone, and welcome to our Shabbat night lesson. Lesson 18, titled Mishpatim. I want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey to study the Torah, and we'll study it weekly, and we will get through the first 5 books of the Bible in 1 year time. In 52 weeks. There are 54 lessons, so we will have to double up at some point, but I just want to assure you we will finish it, and we're going to have a great time studying the Word, because like Yeshua said, man does not live by bread, but by every word that proceeded forth from the mouth of the Father. And so, thank you for joining me. To my sister, put yourself on mute. I'm hearing conversation there. So, thank you again. We're going to have a great time on our lesson. It's amazing that the children of Israel have just heard the 10 expressions we call the 10 commandments. They've just heard that from the voice. They've actually heard it in their hearing. They've heard it. They've seen the wonders of nature preparing for the onset of the creator of the universe coming into his creation. So we want to thank you so much for joining us. They have heard the words, and now they understand even more after our lesson of Mishpatim, which means judgments. So they're going to hear a lot more about how they're going to develop a society, because these were people that had been under the bond of slavery for well over 100 or so years. Sometimes we teach that it was 400 years of slavery, but that was the time of their ascent into Egypt. And then remember, during the life of Joseph and right after Joseph and his brothers, they were really left alone to live their lives and to grow and produce and do whatever they wanted in the most prosperous land in the land of Egypt. And so Jehovah then begins to explain to them what it means to be people, because you're going to be different. He's already changed the calendar even before they left the land of Egypt. He had told Moses to change the calendar so that they would begin to understand that they were to be different, a nation of priests. And so that was a big thing to have transpire, but yet and still, rather than guide them directly into the land, the route was changed, and they went down the line and then crossed over the Red Sea. It was a form of like baptism into this new people, this new priesthood, a nation of priests, that Jehovah was going to develop them into understanding that they were to be. And so then he guides them over to Mount Sinai, where they were out, they had no water, and without water in the desert, you'll die in a matter of days. Moshe hits the rock and water flows, and they have water for themselves, for their animals, for their cooking, whatever they need, enough water continually poured out of this rock, this stream of water, this large volume of water. So the whole time, and they're going to be here as we go through Exodus, we're going to see where they're going to be there for right at a year. So that's a huge amount of water, but it just began to demonstrate the mercy and the grace of the Creator to take them to this place and then provide for them while they're there. And they had manna and they had quail and they just had whatever they needed. But the primary need physically was water. And up until this time, the priestly lineage that was going to be transferred to the Levites was the firstborn male. So the firstborn male was considered the priest of the family. And so we just had a great time, and now we're going to get into these judgments or these ordinances and what transpires with them. We're going to see where there's compensation when you do something, there's damages, as we call it. There's accountability for when you strike someone or you cause harm to another. And then we're going to get restitution, where how you have to provide for someone if you wrong them or whatever you've done. There was compensation. And if that compensation would be gained, if you had nothing, then the compensation would be you going into servitude to that person you have harmed. But once again, understand this. I know we were taught in the church that grace is the New Testament thing. Well, you can't have laws. To wipe more than 4 times. You can't have laws without grace, as we found out. Let me close this up. Cause these embarrassing skid marks. You can't have laws without grace, as we found out in the book of Genesis, right? Where they were in covenant with the Creator and just don't eat from this tree. And they because when you do, you will die. Well, grace entered because Adam lived at least until 980 years old. And so that was grace. That was the grace of God. So whenever you have rules, regulations, then man needs grace because he's prone, because of what we call the leshon hara, or the evil inclination, or our self-centeredness that we are born with. Because of that, it is the mercy and grace of Jehovah, the Creator, who then sends Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord Savior, to do what? Reconcile us back to Him and show us the way of how we are to behave. So the 10 words were divided, what we call the 10 commandments, into 2 sections. The first 5, man's relationship with Jehovah the Creator. And the second 5 was man's relationship with one another. Well, now when you put that into practice, then you need what? Ordinances and judgments, so that the society will be ordered under the principles of the 10 words, the 5 governing man's dealing with the Creator, and the other 5 man's dealing with one another. So we get into all of that tonight. And so we want to get started and delve into this. And even though you might want to say, well, we know a lot. Well, we need to understand that this is what man is required to do, to be considered a child of Jehovah. And so going through it is not burdensome at all. It helps us understand, what does the Creator expect from us? And He gave it to us through the words that He gave Moshe to give to mankind, not just the children of Israel. They were to write it down and then teach it to the world, but the word was for the entire creation. And so with that, we're going to take in our communion and then begin our shared screen and start our lesson for tonight. And I'm sorry, I forgot to send out with my notes. I forgot to send out The Haftarah is fascinating because in our lesson for tonight, it's a lot about the topic of slavery. And I know for me, that's a very difficult and topic to raise because many of our ancestors, we were just talking about that tonight. I mean, last night at a gathering, that our ancestors were stolen from another country and brought into this nation as slaves. Well, that word is used a lot. And so it really makes it difficult for us to see past what has transpired in the history of the African American people. But in fact, we'll see here where kidnapping was a crime punished by death. So to take another person for the purpose of sale from one place and taking from one place to another, according to the scriptures, was punishable by death. And so nothing but evil is going to come from a situation whereby the Creator tells us that if you do that, you're going to pay. I'm going to hold you accountable. And for man to hold you accountable, the punishment is death. So all of that we see as we go into this, and it just makes us kind of wonder, how did all of that go about? Well, we know it came about through sin and man's evil inclination. And so then one group of people decides to pick another group of people for servitude to themselves against their will. And the whole point of what the scriptures are bringing out is how man was born to be free, and how for African Americans in this country still fighting to have what the Creator told us in this word, the reality of how man should treat one another. And so this is just a fascinating study. It's really hard to chew on because of the fact, as I said, that we look at slavery through the eyes of people in the African American community and for African peoples, because it transpired from there, from that continent to the continent, actually all over the world. And so it is imperative that we look at it. It would be great if those people that call themselves Christian would understand that the penalty for what was done, you couldn't harm you had to treat a slave as a human, and to whip him or to injure him in any way was forbidden. And you could be brought up on charges. Matter of fact, if you hurt a slave to the point where they lost an eye, that person was automatically freed. And then you had to compensate him for whatever the judges told you had to pay for the loss of the eye. If you hit him and knocked a tooth out, then he was also free. You had to free him and then pay damages for the fact that you knocked out a tooth. So all of these things point out evil of the system that we recognize, and that's why it's so hard for us to want to talk about, because of how evil it was. And yet and still, we find it right there at Mount Sinai after telling them how man's relationship with the Creator and then man's relationship with one another. Then, because of what the people, where they were, because remember, Yeshua comes and meets us where we are. And then he takes us and changes us. Should we want to be changed, he will change us and help us see things in a different way. And that's very much needed, especially at a time when in this country it is really, that calls itself a Christian nation, has no clue. That evil inclination has been so transfixed in the minds of people, especially the governing class that's governing at this particular time in this nation, that they think, or they would have themselves think that what they're doing is in line with Scripture, but it's not. It was never that way, and it started way back on the Declaration of Independence when it said that all men are created equal. But then when we get into the rest of it, we find out they say, oh, but there was one human that we're going to classify as 3/5 of a man, of a person, in order to do what? Give us the moral right to do that, to do to them what we're going to do. And they're going to be slaves forever. That was forbidden under what we're going to study today. Even if you were a slave brought in from another people, even because of war in Jubilee on the 50th year, you were free. And all during the time that you were there, you had the ability to say, I like the way you run your government here. It's not the way it was where I'm from, but can I join you? And then you would be given the ability to become what? Grafted in. You become a part of this great nation, the nation of Israel. And so we're going to see that tonight. And it's important that I know for me, immediately I get, I get all clenched fists. I'm ready to strike. But anyway, we go through it. Why? Because it's the word. It is the word that the Creator has given us through Moshe, through the children of Israel, that we learn to do what? How we are to relate to the Creator and how do we are to relate to one another. And especially in difficult times like this, we need to be reminded of who we are and whose we are. And so with that, we're going to take communion and then begin our lesson. We remember from 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 25 through 32, where Shaul instructed, gave the instruction that was given to him by Yeshua himself. And he said that he explained to him what transpired. And with that, what he should teach to the what? Not just the Gentiles, but to all believers, what they should do. And so with that, see if somebody trying to get in. Let me see, hold on. I don't see. Oh, okay. Nope. That's why I shut my phone off, because it'll tell me when there's a message, but I have to open it up. It takes my concentration. So that's why I would shut it off. But since we just started our lesson, I wanted to see if anyone was trying to get in and were unable to do so. So we're going back to 1 Corinthians, where Shaul taught that on the night of the meal before the death of Yeshua, that he gathered his disciples together, and at that meal, he took bread. Let me get this open. So, I got it. All right, there we go. Anything that disturbed the rhythm. Here we go. So anyway, he took bread. It would be made like a pizza loaf, and he passed it around. And first he blessed the Father for the bread. In Hebrew, he said, Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech halom hamotzi min haaretz. Blessed are you, Jehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He told them to take a piece, for this was a symbol of his body that was going to be broken just for us. And he said, eat this and do it often. Whenever you gather around me, do this in remembrance of me. And so they ate. Then he took a cup. It was a cup of wine, and he passed it around. He blessed the Father for the wine. Baruch atah Yehovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam bori pari hagafen. Blessed are you, Jehovah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. He told him to drink, for this is a symbol of my blood that is shed for the remission of your sins and for a renewed covenant with me. Do this often, always in remembrance of me. And so they drank. And so we drink. And a lot of times I have to combine that grape juice with water because I lose my voice. Okay, with that, we're going to get into our lesson tonight, Mishpatim. So let's get to our shared screen and get to our slideshow presentation. Okay, this is lesson 18, Mishpatim, and you see how it's spelled, Mishpitim, and it's judgments or ordinances. And this was given after the 10 words. And then we're going to find out that tonight Moshe is going to ask them again. He's going to read it to them because he's been compiling this word all along. And so it wasn't that he recorded all of it when he went up on Mount Sinai. He was recording, remember there was a stop, and he began to give some mishpatim and some judgments to the people that Jehovah had told him to write down. And so this whole concept of a covenant relationship is, we saw it back in Genesis with Abraham and Jehovah when they cut the animals in half and each person went through the halves. And basically it's like, rather than break the covenant, it would be like what happened is as if I don't exist. And so fascinating, but that's why we needed grace. Grace in the garden, grace in the covenant making all throughout time. Why? Because we messed up. We violated the covenant, and that's as if we don't exist. Well, that means an understanding that when you violate the covenant, you basically, the rights of death that were pronounced way back in Genesis are yours. And instantaneous grace is what we need. Because we mess up, and the wages of that messing up is death. Because why? We're violating a covenantal promise. Now, everybody that's a believer in Yeshua, you have entered a covenant with him. That's why he did this at the meal and said, whenever we gather in his name, to remember what we are saying, what we are doing, and how we are to live in line with the teachings of the word. So every time we take communion, it reminds us of grace and mercy and how Yeshua came that we may be what? Saved through faith in him and might live a life before others to demonstrate to them how a child of God should live. So with that, we're going to get into our lesson on tonight from Exodus 21 and 1 all the way till chapter 24, verse 18. We're going to see if we can get through that on tonight. We're going to start with the Haftarah, which came from Jeremiah chapter 34, verses 8 through 22. And this is fascinating in that when King Nebuchadnezzar came to the southern kingdom of Judah to defeat them and take them into captivity because they had sinned and grace had run out. And Jehovah told through the prophet Jeremiah, this is what's getting ready to happen to you. And this is what the reason for the destruction of the southern kingdom by the Babylonian people. Remember, as long as you were obedient, Jehovah promised that no one would ever defeat you. But it's because of your disobedience that what we call curses or the enemy comes in and defeats us and does things to us because of disobedience. And so we see in here where the Babylonians came and took the first remnant. That would be what we call the Hebrew boys. That would be, oh my goodness, it'll come back. It'll come to me, just left that quick. But that would be the first group of people that were taken captive. And if you read the book, if you read the book of Jeremiah, you will see where he kept telling them, if you give up, don't fight. If you give up, mercy will be shown by the Babylonians. They're going to take you into captivity. If you fight, you're going to die and be defeated. The false prophets were telling the people, there's no way they're going to defeat us. We all right with Jehovah. Jeremiah said, no, you're not. You have been doing every abominable thing that the northern kingdom went into captivity about. You have followed their pattern. And so this is what's going to happen to you. Well, in this particular word, in chapter 34, Jeremiah says to those that were left, they didn't destroy the temple the first time. But through this misbehavior, the Babylonians came back. And this time, they destroyed all the walls of the city and the temple as well. So we read, starting with verse 8, and we're going to read all of it. This word came to Yirmiyahu or Jeremiah from Jehovah after King Zidkiyahu or Zedekiah. I'll just say Zedekiah because I know most people are more familiar with that name, had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to emancipate them. Everyone who had a male or female slave who was a Hebrew was to let him go free. One of the things that the prophet had told him is the reason you're going into captivity is because you're not following the rules of the covenant when it regards a Hebrew person that has fallen into disfavor and has to pay off debts or whatever. You're keeping them forever. And you were never supposed to do that. You were supposed to let them go free after 6 years. Well, they didn't do it. So he says, you were supposed to let them go free. None was to keep as his slave a fellow Jew. All the leaders and all the people listened who had entered into the covenant, wherein everyone was told to free his male and female slaves and not keep them in bondage any longer. They listened and they let them go. But afterwards, they changed their minds. Sounds like something that happened what we call the Civil War. We had a short period of time called the period of Reconstruction where we were supposed to rebuild, but we were supposed to rebuild under what? Different rules. Now, what happened? Whom they had freed, they brought them back into subjection as slaves. So soon as the Babylonians left, the police left, they went back and told these people, you have to come back into slavery to us. Those that didn't go into the first captivity, which would usually be the older people. Because it was a long journey to Babylon. They knew they wouldn't make it. And so they took the young that they didn't kill in battle, they took all of them. Therefore, this word of Jehovah came to Jeremiah from Jehovah. Here is what Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel, says. When I brought your ancestors out of the land of Egypt, where they lived as slaves, I made this covenant with them. At the end of 7 years, every one of you is to set free his brother Hebrew who has been sold to you and has served you 6 years. That's where the whole concept of indentured servitude came in. Is when they read this thing and they said, okay, so that person that does that, basically because of debt, they call it debtor's prison, things like that, because he owed that person or because he had done something to that person, which we're going to talk about today, then he had to go and work it off. And the judges pronounced what the amount of time would be, but it could not be any longer than 6 years. At the end of, he says, at the end of 7 years, verse 14, every one of you is to set free his brother who has been sold to you and has served you 6 years. You ought to let him go free from you. But your ancestors did not listen to me or pay any attention. Now you repented. You did what is right from my viewpoint when each of you, that's important. Many times we call ourselves righteous from our viewpoint. He said, but you did it right from my viewpoint, which is his word. You operated in accordance with the word. In other words, you repented. You said, I'm sorry. I didn't want to do that. And you corrected the behavior. He said, when each of you proclaimed freedom to his fellow, and you made a covenant before me. So you cut the animals apart, and all of you rich people walked between them and said, hey, we ain't doing that no more. Why? Because we realize that's a violation. So you made another covenant. And then you profaned my name when each of you took back his male and female slaves, whom you had set free to live as they wished, and brought them back into subjection as your slaves. Then he goes on to say, therefore, here's what Jehovah says. You did not heed me and proclaim freedom, each to his brother and each to his neighbor. So now I proclaim for you a freedom, says Jehovah. For the sword, plague, and famine, I will make you an object of horror to all the kingdoms on earth. And for the men who violated my covenant by not living up to the conditions of the covenant, which the leaders of Yehuda or Judah, the leaders of Jerusalem, the officials, the Kohanim, the priests, and all the people of the land who passed between the parts of the camp. So everybody was trying to get some peace from the Babylonians by being obedient to what Jeremiah had told them. He said, now I will hand them over to their enemies, hand them over to those who seek their lives, and their corpses will become food for birds in the air and wild animals. Zedekiah, king of Yehuda, and his officials, I will hand over to their enemies, to those who seek their lives, and to the army of the king of Babel or Babylon, which has withdrawn. He was gone. He left the people there, saying, now you're going to pay tribute to me, but we're not going to destroy your temple. We're not going to destroy any more than we've already destroyed your cities around Jerusalem. And we're going to leave you in charge to make sure this happens. He says, now I will give the order, says Jehovah, and cause them to return to this city. They will attack it, capture it, and burn it to the ground. And I will make the cities of Yehuda desolate and uninhabited. So this shows us in a companion study, one of the causes of the southern kingdom going into captivity and then being complete grace had come. And the armies of the Babylonians, they left a few people there. But the armies were taking all of the younger captives and others back with them to Babylon. They had done what they can, and they left these people to pay tribute to them. They're going to pay taxes to them. And they wanted them to be able to farm the land and do other things and pay taxes, which is the very same thing the Romans did later at the time of Yeshua. And so this shows you what happens to the children of Israel when they violated the covenant. Now they renewed the covenant, which is what we're talking about when we do our communion. We're renewing the covenant. Yeshua said, I didn't come to abolish, but to help fulfill. So, therefore, when we join ourselves to Yeshua, we are renewing the covenant to the same covenant that we're going to study tonight and all that goes along with it. We're studying that and we have to learn to apply it to 2026 time. But at no point did Yeshua ever say that he got rid of the covenant. He said, no, you're going to renew it with me, and I'm going to remind you each time you come together and take the bread and the wine, I'm reminding you of the covenant that you are now a part of as my disciples. And so that's the companion study from the Old Testament called the Tanakh. And now we get into a companion study of the new, the Brit Hadasha, or what we call the new, should be really renewed covenant of Yeshua. And that comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 48. And we know that chapter 5 is basically the Sermon on the Mount. So a part of that is, we're going to read right here. It's a companion to fit into what? The rulings and ordinances and how we are to deal with one another in our lesson for the night. He says, you have heard that our fathers were told, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I tell you now, this is the teaching that was part of the problem with the children of Israel, because they felt that if you weren't, not only did they not have to love you, but Jehovah didn't love you. He never said that. He never told them. He said, you ought to treat them with love and respect so that they will learn to do as you do and be blessed. He says, I tell you, Yeshua says, I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Then you will become children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun shine on good and bad people alike. And he sends rain to the righteous and the unrighteous alike. Remember what righteousness is. That is being obedient to what the word says. That's how you are righteous. When you do what the word says do. Whenever you violating the word, that is an unrighteous act. He said, what reward do you get if you love only those who love you? So this is what the children of Israel were supposed to do and supposed to begin to transcend what they were doing. But they had a problem even loving Yeshua. And so we know it wasn't going to go well. And then in the year 70 AD, the Romans then came and destroyed the city, and it was not rebuilt until 1948. So this helps us understand what transpired with the children of Israel, and then the very same thing that they were warned by Yeshua, that accept me as Messiah and all things will be well with you. Well, they didn't accept him as Messiah, said he wasn't, and put him to death. Now that death brought in what he's talking here. And if you are friendly only to your friends, are you doing anything out of the ordinary? Even the Goyim, that was the Gentile. There were only Jews and Gentiles, only believers in Jehovah, and everyone else was considered a Gentile. He says, therefore, be what? Perfect. This is what Yeshua said. Therefore, be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So now he was what? Sinless. He knew no sin, but he took on sin to pay the price for each one of us. And as his disciples, he's telling us, you can be like I. You can be, I'm giving what? I'm sending you the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, to guide you and teach you the truth. As you learn the truth, do it. Why? Because you can be perfect. Now, grace be extended to you. He says, quickly repent, and then grace will be extended. But you have to turn from the evil. You can't say, I'm sorry, and do it again willingly. You say, I'm sorry, I don't want to ever do that again, and by your strength, I won't. Then if you mess up, you say, I'm sorry, but you got to be what? Desiring to turn from that behavior. And speaking it is the first order of what? Turning from it. I don't want to do that. Why? Because I can be perfect. Why? Because he has equipped me with his word, with the Ruach HaKodesh, who gives me the knowledge and the power to be perfect. So with that, I think I took a lot of time. We're going to get into our lesson and see if we can get through it. The first part of our session. Let me get my notes off on the first part of my session. And the first part of our session was going to be from Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 19. And in that, we're going to talk about the first area, which is this talk about servitude, servants. Why? They were very familiar with what slavery was, but he's going to teach them another way in which to look at that so that they can then go and teach the world. Not just saying it's what? No slavery. He's not saying that. Why? Because Yeshua came and reminded us that we're going to have the poor with us always. The poor were the ones who usually became a indentured servant to pay off debt or for failure to basically handle what they were given, because every 50 years was a year of Jubilee. Therefore, you were given back any land that you ever owned. That went back to you. You returned to that, and you were given another opportunity to provide. And if you're doing what the scriptures had told you to do, then you were going to prosper. So it goes on and says, these are the rulings you are to present to them. So now Moshe is to tell the people this. If you purchase a Hebrew slave, he is to work 6 years. But in the 7th, he is to be given his freedom without having to pay anything. If he came single, he is to leave single. If he was married when he came, his wife is to go with him when he leaves. Basically, then they would both become servants, but the master had to do what? He had to provide them with a place to live so that the man could work it off. Well, if he brought his wife along with him and whatever children, then they were free to go once his 6 years were up. In the 7th year, he's gone. Not only that, we'll find out later in Leviticus that he was supposed to compensate him when he leaves. But if his master gave him a wife and she bore him sons or daughters, then the wife and her children will belong to her master and he will leave by himself. Now, the whole concept we're looking at here helps us to look at it from a different perspective than what comes to our mind when we think about this. Because it seems like he was just breeding. The master wanted him to breed, and now he's telling him, get out. You done bred. No, it wasn't like that, because he understood if he came single, he understood that in 6 years, I'm free. Now, if he saw some woman there that his master owned, because he most likely the master ain't gonna let him marry none of his daughters. He ain't gonna do that because he's working on them. But if he finds another person there who, for whatever reason, she was maybe captured in war or something like that, and he decides he wants to marry her, he understands this rule. So if he say, no, let me work off this 7th year, I'm free. He's not coming there to marry. He's coming there to work off this debt and go back. If he brought a wife with him, then they're all going back. But he's not coming there to get married because he's just coming there to pay off a particular debt. Nevertheless, now, if he does decide to get married, he understands this option as well. If the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, so I don't want to go free, he has to say that. I don't want to go free. I just want to stay here and serve. Master treating me real good, and I married. That's what they mean by he gave him a wife. He wanted to marry that woman, so the master married him to that woman. But you can't take, he understands you can't take her with you when you go. So he basically saying, I don't want to go. He understands this when he says he wants to marry her. Then his master is to bring him before Elohim. This word Elohim is the same word used in many times in Hebrew to mean judges. And there at the door or doorpost, his master is to pierce his ear. So he pierces his ear with an awl, and the man will be his slave for life. He says, I don't want to live any other way. Then he has to go before judges and pronounce that, because the desire of man, period, is to be free. And so therefore, he would never subject himself to this unless he had already considered, because he had been taught this even as he went into bondage to this man. So now that you want to stay, it's all good. Okay, fine. You stay. However, then in the year of Jubilee, there could be a problem. There could be a problem in Jubilee, because that meant the year of Jubilee freed everybody. So that had to be dealt with by the judges as well. If a man sells his daughter as a slave, she is not to go free like men's slaves. If her master married her, now basically, if he sold his daughter there, then that man asked for her, for either himself or one of his kids. So part of her becoming an indentured servant there would be that man's got to pay a dowry to her father. He's got to pay a dowry to her. If her master married her but decides she no longer pleases him, then he is to allow her to be redeemed. Redeemed means purchased back. You don't want her no more, well, then the judge has got to deal with that as well. He is not allowed to sell her to a foreign people because he has treated her unfairly. The fact that you don't want her anymore and you're going to give her a writ of divorce, basically indicates that you're at fault. She hasn't done anything. You just don't want her. That's your selfish act. If he has her marry his son, then he is to treat her like a daughter. She doesn't come in as a servant to his son. She comes in as a daughter-in-law. If he marries another wife, he is not to reduce her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he fails to provide her with these three things, she is to be given her freedom without having to pay anything. So she owes him, the debt is paid. Whatever that dowry was, it's over. It's paid. Now you're done. We complete the first part as it goes on, verses 12 through 19. Whoever attacks a person, now this is for basically damages or restitution. Whoever attacks a person and causes his death must be put to death. That's premeditated. If it was not premeditated, but an act of Elohim, in other words, everything was the providence of the Creator. So if the man swung an axe and the top flew off and hit somebody upside the head and killed him, that was considered Jehovah allowing that. Therefore, that person would then go to a place for which he can flee. So that person could then, because of what is called the kinsman redeemer, or that next of kin might come looking for him, then he says there's a place where he can go because it was an accident. They still go before the judges. The judges will still deal with it. If they find it was completely an accident, then you leave that man alone. And you will be guilty of murder if you do anything to that person. But if someone willfully kills another after deliberately planning, that's the premeditation, you ought to take him even from my altar and put him to death. So even if the priest does that, you put him to death. In later times, there were times when you read in the scriptures where someone ran and grabbed the horns of the altar, because the altar that was made had horns on each side. They would go grab the horns of the altar, seeking safety. But they would come back and tell you, even from my altar, according to this text, we can take you from the altar and still give you justice. Whoever attacks his father or mother must be put to death. Whoever kidnaps someone must be put to death, regardless of whether he was already sold, him or the person is found still in his possession. So the whole slave trade was evil in the mind of the Creator. The whole slave trade was evil. So whenever they were getting up on the boats, and even though the Pope sanctioned it and told man that you can go in there and do that because they did not have a soul, and for that reason, you could go in there and claim them as your property. They are not human. They don't have a soul. Even though the Pope signed that decree and allowed European nations to go into Africa and steal and kidnap people, that does not change what the word says. The word said, whoever kidnaps someone is put to death. Why? Because God, Jehovah, created man to be free and to act in accordance with the will of God, but choosing to do that. And so this lets us know right here that might have been something that was going on in Egypt, but this group of people, God's people, Jehovah's people, are to act in accordance with this. Whoever curses his father or mother must be put to death. Remember, that's the top 5. That's definitely in relationship to the Creator. The Creator says to honor your father and mother. So when you're cursing him, you're basically saying, may Jehovah curse you, do evil to you. And that's contrary to the commandment. It says to honor your father and mother. So you see the commandment right there. 2 people fight, and one hits the other with a stone or with his fist, and the injured party doesn't die, but is confined to his bed. Then, if he recovers enough to be able to walk around outside. Even if with a cane, the attacker will be free of liability, except to compensate him for his loss of time and take responsibility for his care until his recovery is complete. So that means you got to take care of this person until he is completely healed. That completes the first part of our session. Now we're going to get into the second part of our session, which is also 2 slides. It goes from Exodus chapter 21, verse 20, all the way to chapter 22, verse 3. It goes on to say, and once again, this reading about this really makes one angry because of what happened to African people in the shores of this nation in which we live, in the Caribbean and in South America, even up into Canada. All of this transpired. If a person beats his male or female slave with a stick so severely that he dies, he is to be punished, except that if the slave lives, he is not to be punished since the slave is his property. So that means you didn't beat him severely. That's what it means. You might have struck them because of something they did. But once again, you are not to treat them you are to treat them as another human being, another child of God. If people are fighting with each other and happen to hurt a pregnant woman so badly that the unborn child dies, then even if no other harm follows, he must be fined. He must pay the amount set by the woman's husband and confirmed by judges. So he has to go before the judges and pay restitution for what has happened to this woman by the loss of a child. But if any harm follows, then you ought to give life for life. That does not mean you kill someone who has done something wrong other than premeditated murder. This is what goes before the judges, and a fee for each part of the body is then given, even for an unborn child. There was an amount asserted by the judges that you would have to give to that person. If he knocks out his male or female slaves too, he must let him go free in compensation for his too. If an ox, so this basically shows you that you just can't beat as if this person was your property, even your animal was your property to do with as you please. The Creator says, my people don't do that. If an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox is to be stoned and its flesh not eaten. But the owner of the ox will have no further liability. However, if the ox was in the habit of goring in the past and the owner was warned but did not confine that ox so that it ended up killing a man or a woman, then the ox is to be stoned and its owner too is to be put to death. So once again, this is a system of what? Justice, considering mercy and grace. However, a ransom may be imposed on him, so he might have to pay. And the death penalty will be commuted if he pays the amount imposed. So in other words, he's going to have to understand how the Creator treats life. And so therefore, you're going to pay this fine that the judges have imposed upon you. And if you don't, I'm going to come for you, says the Creator. If the ox gores a son or daughter, the same rule applies. If the ox gores a male or female slave, its owner must give their master 12 ounces of silver, and the ox is to be stoned to death. So right now, right here, they say, okay, we're going to set a price for this goring taking place. And it's going to be what? 12 ounces of silver. We go on to the second part of this session. If someone removes the cover from a cistern, now this is when you do something on your property and you don't take precautions so that someone else won't be hurt, or digs one and fails to cover it, and an ox or donkey falls in the owner of the cistern must make good the loss by compensating the animal's owner. But the dead animal will be his. Now he can do what he wants with that dead animal. Usually they would use that for some kind of feed. If someone steals an ox or sheep and slaughters or sells it, he is to pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Basically, sheep were used to generate wool and for food. But an ox could be sacrificed or it could be worked. And so it was more important for you to compensate that owner for that ox than it was for the sheep. But you still had to do what? You had to compensate the owner. If a thief caught in the act of breaking in is beaten to death, it is not murder, unless it happens after sunrise. Well, most of the time, you're not breaking into somebody's tent with everybody in there asleep. It ain't like we see it today. We would have to go and use the law of the land to try to deal with some of this today. But back then, you busting in on somebody, then if they could see you, then they were just supposed to bust you upside your head with something, but not kill you. But a thief must make restitution. So if he has nothing, he himself is to be sold to make good the loss from the theft. If what he stole is found alive in his possession, he is to pay double, no matter whether it is an ox, a donkey, or a sheep. So if he just stole an ox to work it, then you're going to pay double. You're going to give him, and if you don't, they're going to set a price on the ox. And if you don't do that, if you don't pay that, you see what happens. Then the state can come and deal with you. That completes the second part of our session. Now we're going to go into the third part of our session, which is Exodus 21, verse 33 through 22, verse 3. And I'm sorry, this is the completion. Let's get to the third part. Verse 22, verse 4, all the way to verse 26. If a person causes a field or vineyard to be, I got some stuff that came up on the screen that's preventing me from seeing what that is up there. Grazed over or lets his animal loose to graze in someone else's field, he is to make restitution from the best produce of his own field and vineyard. If a fire is started and spreads to thorns so that stacked grain, standing grain, or field is destroyed, the person who lit it must make restitution. So this is all about, once again, you paying the damages for what your negligence has done. That's how we would look at it in today's system. If a person entrusts a neighbor with money or goods and they are stolen from the trustee's house, then if the thief is found, he must pay double. But if the thief is not found, then the trustee must state before Elohim. Well, once again, I put that judges there because that's who they'll stand before with the judges, that he did not take the person's goods himself. In every case of dispute over ownership, whether of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, clothing, or any missing property where one person says, this is mine, both parties are to come before, once again, the judges, and the one whom the judges condemn must pay the other one double. So now if you're saying this, I found it, it's mine, next man said, no, that belongs to me. You said, no, I don't. It ain't got your name on it. Well, when you go before the judges, if they find out that that did belong to that other person, then you're going to pay double. Verse 9, if a person trusts a neighbor to look after a donkey, ox, or sheep, or any animal, and it dies, is injured, or is driven away unseen, then the neighbor's oath before Jehovah that he has not taken the goods will settle the matter between them. They'll still go before the judges, but this is what the judges are going to rule. The owner is to accept it without the neighbors making restitution. But if it was stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. Animal ran away on his own, then okay, go try to find him. You can't find him, I'm not liable. If it was torn to pieces by an animal, the neighbor must bring it as evidence, and then he doesn't need to make good the loss. So you see, they're going to go before judges. If someone borrows something from his neighbor and it gets injured or died, with the owner not present, he must make restitution. If the owner was present, he need not make good the loss. If the owner hired it out, the loss is covered by the hiring fee. So when you got this animal to work your land, to help you plow your fields or do whatever you're going to do, then you paid a rental fee. Now, if something happened to the animal that wasn't the fault of the negligence of the person who had the rental fee, then the loss is covered by the fee. If you didn't have a fee, then you had a note for the fee. With that, we're going to go, what is this? This popped up on my screen. Get out of here. Go to the third part of our session and complete it. If a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price for her to be his wife. But if her father refused to give her to him, he must pay a sum equivalent to the bride price for virgin. So this is not rape. Seduces means it wasn't rape, but he charmed her and she agreed and they slept together. But to avert perhaps death, he would pay the bride price if that was his wife, because he was basically told he's going to marry her. If he didn't want to marry her, you're going to pay the price anyway. She then would have to be going back to her father and be taken care of by her father. So he's going to pay the price. He goes on, verse 17, you are not to permit a sorceress to live. All counseling went through the priests. So sorcerers or people who claim divine instruction to help them, they were put to death. Whoever has sexual relations with an animal must be put to death. Anyone who sacrifices to any god other than Jehovah alone is to be completely destroyed. You must neither wrong nor oppress a foreigner living among you. Need to teach that to people about what's going on today. For you yourselves were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You are not to abuse any widow or orphan. If you do abuse them in any way, and they cry to me, I will certainly heed their cry. My anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword. So you're going to meet you're going to have what we would call an accident. Something's going to happen to you. Your own wives will be widows, and your own children fatherless. Need to talk about that to ICE and ICE, under the guise of many men being Christians in ICE, should read this and then understand that Jehovah you will pay a price for that behavior. Now, if you don't belong to him, well, you was going to the lake anyway. So your evil behavior and leading others to your evil behavior will cause you to meet death. And it may not, only grace and mercy will get you to the place to where you live a long life. But normally you will suffer death. And since everything was attributed to the Creator, we attribute the fact that that happens to you. It wasn't no accident. That was that coming back on you. If you loan money, verse 24, to one of my people who is poor, you are not to deal with him as with a creditor, and you are not to charge him interest. And so basically, in many cases, they would consider that person in need, if your brother is in need and you see him in need and you don't help him, then you are violating the covenant with the Creator. So if you do decide, I'm going to loan him or he's going to work for whatever you decide, there can be no interest charged to him. Because if he didn't need it so desperately, he wouldn't be trying to borrow. He said, if you take your neighbor's coat as collateral, Yeshua gave a parable about that in his teachings. You ought to restore it to him by sundown because it is his own. That's what he said. He would take that and use that for a covering. He needs it to wrap his body. What else does he have in which to sleep? Moreover, if he cries out to me, I will listen because I am compassionate. So even if you're not compassionate, Jehovah says he is, and he's going to cause a situation in your life to remind you of what's going on. Now, the fourth part of our lesson is going to talk about how you should behave toward these judges of Jehovah and toward leaders of the people, along with other different ordinances that are to be dealt with. Goes on in verse 27 and says, you are not to curse Elohim and you are not to curse a leader of your people. Now, to curse Elohim really means it's like shaking your fist and saying, I don't care what you say, I'm going to do what I want to do. Well, you're going to have a problem. And a leader of your people. Now, once again, I ain't saying as believers in Yeshua, we should act with compassion towards our leaders and not cuss them out, do something like that, but not ask for death to come to one of our leaders. If they're not acting right, Jehovah is going to get them anyway. So as his people, we don't have to call for him to destroy any of our leaders, including our president, the president of the United States. As evil as his actions may be, we are not to ask the Creator to kill him. Why? Because we belong to Jehovah, we ought to pray for him. But his behavior going to cause it to happen anyway. But as believers in Yeshua and in this covenant, we understand that he's going to pay a price for what he's doing. So we can say, Lord, mercy, mercy for him. That's it. He said, you are not to delay offering from your, in other words, the first fruits, olive oil or wine. The firstborn of your sons you ought to give to me. That's the firstborn. The shekel that you have, the 5 shekels you pay for redeeming him. The 5 shekels of the firstborn belongs to the Creator. Because at that time, they were going to be the priests. But that continued even though the Levites became the priestly class. But the firstborn male still required an offering. He says you are to do the same with your oxen and your sheep, but it is to stay with this mother 7 days. And on the 8th day, you are to give it to me. So the 8th day was the day of redemption for the firstborn male. You ought to be my specially separated people. So he's telling you why you ought to behave in this manner, because that's the only way this sinful world is going to understand what a relationship with the Creator entails. What kind of behavior should come from his people? Therefore, you are not to eat any flesh torn by wild animals in the countryside, rather throw it out for the dogs. Chapter 23, verse 1. You are not to repeat false rumors. Remember, that's the commandment. You don't bear false witness. Do not join hands with the wicked by offering perjured testimony. This is giving you some more information on what? Bearing false witness. Do not follow the crowd when it does what is wrong. Hello. And don't allow the popular view to sway you into offering testimony for any cause if the effect will be to pervert justice. That's what we call today perjury. On the other hand, don't favor a person's lawsuit simply because he is poor. If you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey straying, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey which belongs to someone who hates you lying down helpless under its load, you are not to pass him by, but to go and help him free it. So this is the behavior of the children of the Creator, so that the world can see how the children of God, of Jehovah, act, how the disciples of Yeshua conduct themselves. Now we're going to go into the fifth part of our lesson for today. And in the fifth part, we're going to study, it's from Exodus 23, verses 6 through 19. So we were able to get that all on one page. But we're going to continue with the understanding of these ordinances and laws. He says, do not deny anyone justice in his lawsuit simply because he is poor. So you don't show, judges don't show partiality. You don't lie in your testimony at any time, but you certainly are not going to join with an unjust situation. It says, keep away from fraud and do not cause the death of the innocent. So in other words, justices, you are responsible to make sure justice is served. So then, this is hard because in this nation, because of racism and things of that type, we see all the time people being given the death penalty. And people have lied on them. Police officers have lied on them. They have been judged because they're poor. All of those things. We are to teach the unlearned that you never do that. That is not the correct behavior. And you're going to stand before the judge. You're going to stand before the judge of all men. And what will transpire at that? He told the judges, you never receive a bribe, or your leaders, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and it subverts the cause of the righteous. You are not to oppress a foreigner, for you know how a foreigner feels, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. And we can talk about the people that came to this nation. You at one point were a foreigner. Your ancestors were foreigners. Everyone that came to this land that wasn't here when they came from Europe and other places is a foreigner. So you should know better than to do what is going on in this country at this time. Verse 10, for 6 years you are to sow your land and seed and gather in its harvest. But in the 7th year you are to let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among you, your people, can eat, and what they leave, the wild animals in the countryside, can eat. Do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. For 6 days you are to work, but on the 7th day, that's Shabbat, that's the day, you should cease from things that you normally do as your occupation. He goes on to say, do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. Say, rest, and your slave girl, son, and the foreigner be renewed. So you're not to cause anyone to work. Don't tell someone to go work in my place. No one is supposed to work on Shabbat. Pay attention to everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods or even let them be heard crossing your lips. 3 times a year. Now we get into, once again, the festival. You are to observe a festival for me. Keep the festival of matzah. That's right after Pesach or Passover for 7 days as I ordered you. You ought to eat matzah at the time determined in the month of Aviv. This is the 7 days after Passover. You ought to eat only unleavened bread, for it was in that month that you left Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Everyone goes to the temple at those times of festivals bringing something. If you're very poor, then you can bring flour. You bring something. You don't appear empty-handed. He goes on to say, next, the festival of harvest, which is Shavuot, the first fruits of your efforts sowing in the field. And last, the festival of ingathering, that is Sukkot, at the end, which is usually around September, October, at the final end of the year when you gather in from the fields the results of all your efforts. 3 times a year, you men are to appear before the Lord Jehovah. This is without fail. That's why you don't see women there, because they could be pregnant and not unable to make the journey. But if she wasn't, she was going to go with him because there's a blessing in obedience. And she wanted to be there. She may have to stay and take care of the little babies because they couldn't make the journey. And so for those reasons, it just says your men will appear. But in most cases, if the woman was able, she would come along with him because there was a blessing there. Now, she could still be blessed if she was with child and couldn't make the trip. Jehovah understood those things. But the men had no excuse. You are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice with unleavened bread, nor is the fat of my festival to remain all night until morning. That was Pesach. You are to bring the best first fruits of your land into the house of Jehovah your Elohim. And you are not to boil a young animal in its mother's milk. In other words, you were to spare a time frame for that young animal if you were going to take the mother and sacrifice her, or even for a peace offering or anything else. You never did it at the same time. With that, we're going to get into the 6th part of our session, which is from Exodus 23, verses 20 through 25. He says, I am sending an angel ahead of you. Jehovah says to Moshe, I'm sending an angel ahead of you to guard you on the way and bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him. Listen to what he says and do not rebel against him, because he will not forgive any wrongdoing of yours, since my name resides in him. But if you listen to what he says and do everything I tell you through him, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. When my angel goes ahead of you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, I will make an end of them. You are not to worship their gods, serve them, or follow their practices. We'll learn later. You don't even ask about them. He says, rather, you ought to demolish them completely. All of their shrines, everything. Demolish them completely. Don't keep any of it. Don't keep your little gold statues. Whatever that is, you ought to destroy it completely. He says, you are to serve Jehovah your Elohim, and he will bless your food and water, and I will take sickness away from among you. So if you serve me, if you're obedient, this is what you get. This is my promise to my people. That's why we can ask for healing. Now, you hope it's always in line with what Yeshua said, your will be done. But Yeshua asked, and so we can ask for healing. We can ask in faith, believing that person is going to be healed. We understand that it's under the purview of the Creator. But we speak life into that situation. We do those things, but we understand that that is under the purview of the Creator. But our faith says We know he's able, and we believe he will, because we are being obedient by asking for healing. That is even obedience. We go on to the seventh part of our session, and we conclude it. Exodus 23, verse 26, all the way to chapter 24, verse 19, and we will have 2 pages for our final session. If your land, in your land, your women will not miscarry or be barren, and you will live out the full span of your lives. I will send terror of me ahead of you. This is all of the promises that he says if you're obedient to the covenant, throwing into confusion all the people to whom you come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs on you. They're going to run. I will send hornets ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Jebusites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, which would cause the land to become desolate and the wild animals too many for you. Jehovah knows, man. He knows that if it's too easy, you're going to get complacent real quick, and that will cause you to forget about him. So he says, I will drive them out from before you gradually until you have grown in number and can take possession of the land. So he's not going to leave the land desolate. You're going to drive them out, then live in that land. You're going to drive them out, and then that tribe will live in that land. He goes on to say, I will set your boundaries from the Sea of Suf to the Sea of the Philistine, from the Red Sea all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. For I will hand the inhabitants of the land over to you, and you will drive them out from before you. You will not make a covenant with them or with their God. They are not to live in your land. Otherwise, they will make you sin against me by ensnaring you to serve their gods. So basically, he's telling you you're going to give them an option to leave. If they don't, you are to destroy them. They can't stay. They have to leave. Why? Because judgment has been rendered to them for the evil they have been doing. And even though they don't acknowledge Jehovah as creator, he is the God of all flesh. And so therefore, they are guilty of violating, and they are going to be punished in that land. Chapter 24, verse 1. To Moshe, Jehovah said, come up to Jehovah, you, Aharon, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the leaders of Israel. Prostrate yourselves at a distance while Moshe alone approaches Jehovah. So now they're going to come and seal this covenant that Jehovah has given them, these ordinances and parts that they're agreeing to. Moshe came and told the people everything Jehovah had said, including all the rulings. The people answered with one voice, we will obey every word Jehovah has spoken. So they're saying, we're going to do this. We will be obedient to this. Moshe wrote down all the words of Jehovah. He rose early in the morning, built an altar at the base of the mountain, and set upright 12 large stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. He sent the young men of the people of Israel to offer burnt offerings and sacrifices. Those would be what? The priestly class. The firstborn male was the priestly class. So they're going to go and offer these sacrifices. Moshe took half of the blood, put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he splashed against the altar. Now, in the second part, as we complete our lesson, then he took the book of the covenant and read it aloud. So now all that we've just studied and all that he had studied up until this point and he had done, he's going to read that aloud to them to say to them, just like walking between the two parts of the animal. To violate the covenant means you are worthy of death. So he reads it aloud so that the people could hear. And they responded. Even after hearing it again, they say, everything that Jehovah has spoken, we will do and obey. Moses took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant, which Jehovah has made with you in accordance with all these words. So this is what you're agreeing to. They've already said, whatever, everything Jehovah has spoken, we will do and obey. Thank you for grace and mercy. Moshe, Aharon, Nadab, and Abihu, which were the sons of Aharon. Remember, the priests under the Levite system had not been instituted yet, but Jehovah has told Moshe who to bring, because Jehovah knows what they're going to do while he's up there them 20 days. And he takes the elders and they go up into the base of the mountain. And they saw the Elohim of Israel. Under his feet was something like a sapphire stone. Pavement as clear as the sky itself. So they actually had a vision of something up there. He did not reach out his hand against these notables of Israel. On the contrary, they saw. So they're now even agreeing to what the people have agreed to. They're saying, as his agents, we come to you and say, we are going to do everything. You have said, we want this covenant. Then they saw something even as they were eating and drinking. So now they took part of this sacrifice with them as they went closer to the Mount Sinai, and under the orders of Jehovah, they went, and he did not destroy him. Because first he told them, don't come. Now he's saying you can come closer. You still can't come up on the mount, but you can come closer. Jehovah said to Moshe, verse 12, come up to me on the mountain and stay there. I will give you the stone tablets. These are the tablets with the 10 concepts or 10 words there. With the Torah and with the commands. In other words, all that we have discussed are centered in these 10 commands. He says, I have written on them so that you can teach them. Moshe got up. Also, Yahashua, his assistant, and Moshe went up onto the mountain of Elohim. To the leaders, he said, stay here for us until we come back. See, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a problem should turn to them. Moshe went up onto the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of Jehovah stayed on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. So Moshe goes up even further, him and Joshua. Why Joshua? Because Jehovah knows who's going to lead the people into the promised land. So this is even more of an anointing going to Joshua or Yahashua. And they go further. And then they stay there for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, Jehovah calls to Moshe out of the cloud. To the people of Israel, the glory of Jehovah looked like a raging fire on the top of the mountain. Moshe entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. He was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So that completes our lesson for today. I don't even know how long I was. Yep, I was the same amount of time every time. But this completes our lesson. So we're going to get out of our shared screen. And we're going to, I don't see any questions. So we're going to do the priestly blessing and complete our Shabbat night lesson. And with that, from Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26, We hold our hands towards one another and say, may Jehovah bless you and keep you. May Jehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Until we meet again next week, I say, Shalom.